The following game has been rated E for everyone by the ESRB. That means that the content in the game is appropriate for anyone aged 6 and up. And while it does not list any specific restrictions or warnings in regards to this specific game, I do know for a fact that it does involve rockets, explosions, and comedy involving rockets and explosions. That means if you are under the appropriate age for the video game, or you feel that this content is not appropriate for you, then you should not be watching this video. You have been warned.
Greetings and salutations, I am Outlier in a video. Welcome to this channel. Joining me today is, of course, my usual co-hosts, Snowball and Wolf. And today we're returning back to the Kerbal Space Program. So the premise of the Kerbal Space Program is that you are running a NASA-like organization for a bunch of little green aliens known as Kerbals. And since, as far as I can tell, the Kerbals don't have any surface cities or towns or any form of habitation outside of the occasional random building, I'm assuming they mostly live underground, but that's not important to the game or its lore, so it's not really shared officially. But anyway, they somehow came from where they were and decided that they wanted to fling themselves into space, or atop of very large, very exploding, fiery things. Which is where you come in. In an effort to get to space, they realized that they need a massive organization to do so. So they created the Kerbal Space Program and assigned you the task of running it. So like any NASA or space agency-like agency, you're in charge of designing craft, building craft, researching new parts, performing science experiments, and trying to get people up to and back from space without causing massive explosions and killing anybody. And much like real life, that doesn't always go to plan. Space is not kind to organic beings, and as I've said before, off camera in my own personal life, nature abhors a vacuum, and space is largely vacuum. And so for anybody who hasn't seen last episode, it's been a while, so I'm not entirely certain what I was doing, but if memory serves, I was trying to get into orbit still, again. Getting into orbit's rather more complex than, well, I should say getting into stable orbit's rather more complex than it actually is. Getting up into space is relatively easy. You just fire off a rocket straight up and hope you break the atmosphere before you run out of gas. And you still have a working parachute on the way back down, otherwise things get interesting. And fast, and then they stop. Getting into stable orbit, however, is an entirely different kettle of fish, because not only do you need to fling yourself out of the atmosphere with enough gas to do so, you need to have enough gas to get your craft traveling fast enough in the right direction, so that way, as it falls back to the planet falls away from it. Therefore, it's essentially in a constant state of what's known as free fall, hence the name. Yes, it is. It's always amusing when science just simply names things for what it is, or just life in general. It's like how trees are named trees. Yes, but then they wouldn't be trees. And that's an entirely different subject matter for an entirely different video. For an entirely different day. So, I'm still trying to get into orbit. I did manage to build a working aircraft, and to my surprise, and, well, largely my surprise, I actually managed to get it to take off the runway. Because things just never take off the runway in my past experience. At least not easily, and not straight. I also built a landcraft using aircraft parts. That's was an experience. Like I said, it was an experience. So, back to trying to get into space, and, well, I'm fairly certain I still have a few missions that require me not being on the surface of the planet or in its atmosphere. But I don't remember what they are, so it should be interesting. And, as stated, this game is, of course, made by... Thank you again. And that being said, let us begin. Right, now, so here we are at the Kerbal Space Center. It is, well, the hub of our space program. And they did recently have an update between last time I played and now, include that added in apparently an alarm feature. I'm not quite certain what it is. I just read the changelog and, well, went from there. I would like to point out that they said that this last update is the last major update they were planning on doing, but I'm fairly certain they said that 3 major updates ago, so who knows. I know they are working on a sequel, and I would be very much pleased to actually get around to playing it, but for now, it's not out yet, so I can't. So these are the various missions that I can partake in. I can conduct observational surveys, where I go to a specific spot at a specific altitude and basically take a report as to what's there. I can also complete test flights for various parts, which basically means that I get to a particular spot. Well, I travel to a specific planet or just do something. Get to a certain state of the craft, get to a certain altitude, get to a certain speed, and activate the part. Or just run a test if it's not an active part. I could also take... Yeah, see, this one actually requires that I be in orbit as opposed to flying through the atmosphere. And then this one requires that I test a liquid fuel engine while landed on the Mun, which is the next step in the achievements of the Kerbal Space Center after we get into orbit. We then travel to the Mun, which is the larger of the 2 moons orbiting Kerbin. So right now I have a focused atmospheric survey, which requires I be flying relatively high near Kerman's miscalculation. Focused temperature survey, which requires that I be flying a ridiculously high altitude near Kerbin's lock. Also need to test the radial mount parachute in flight over Kerbin. And I have to be between an altitude of 2,000 meters and 10,000 meters, traveling at a speed between 100 meters per second and 280 meters per second. And then I also have to get into orbit. And this is the tracking station, keeps track of everything and anything in orbit and on Kerbin. So, various things. And apparently also other launch facilities that I can operate out of, other than the Kerbal Space Center, but apparently I have to travel to them first, and I haven't gotten around to doing that, so there's that. There's also the Research and Development Wing, which basically allows me to unlock new technologies, because I'm playing that version of the game. But they all require science, so, like, for instance, to get flight control, which gets me better aerodynamic winglets and small inline reaction wheels and a re-entry module, I need 45 science, of which I have 2.2. You get science by completing scientific experiments up in space and various other places. Yeah, so there's that. So what was the mission where I needed to test a radial mount parachute at 2,000 to 10,000 meters above Kerbal? So we go to the vehicle assembly bay where I actually build the craft. We'll start with the Mach 1 pod because that's the only real pod that I have. Then I need parachutes. Radial mount parachute, not the drug chute. So I'm going to need 2 of these because, well, it's a physics-based game and they love symmetry, so 2 of those. Those are firework launchers, that's a flag. I was going to say, where are my heat shields? Okay, how do I... There's a way to flip it around. And I kind of do need it flipped around. Because right now it's upside down. There we go. Much better. So, because everything has a tendency to fly forward when I build it, and as it enters the atmosphere, I got tired of trying to get it in backwards, so I just shove a heat shield on the front, and, well, watch as things ignite. Alright, now I need to test these parachutes, so I don't need any crew cabins or anything. I do, however, probably need to control my speed, so that requires engines, and the easiest engines to use for this sort of purpose are liquid fuel engines. So I'm going to need a fuel tank and at least 1 engine for that. And since I also need aerodynamics, because I'm still going to be in atmosphere, I need control for said device. Winglets. Lots and lots of winglets. So let's see how this goes. Get to the launch pad. Alright, so that's braking. That's the landing gear, which it doesn't actually have. That's the camera. That's RCS. SAS on, that's what I'm looking for. And I just realized I did not deal with the facing. So there's that. Alright, that activates all the staging, so let's revert flight back to the launch pad. It's been a while since I played this game. You can probably tell. Alright, SAS on, and yes, I will say that every time. So just change the facings over here, stagings over here. Alright. Here we are, maximum throttle, and away we go. Alright, so we're already at the required speed, so maybe below 280. Alright, and here we go. So, fire off the parachutes, and we're good. Just cut the speed entirely. And let nature take its course. Hopefully. Of course, I should point out that in order to actually get this job completed, the craft has to survive. I think. I'm fairly certain it has to survive. As it flips upside down. Like I said, things like flipping forward on the way back down. What happens when I get aerodynamics involved. Everything should be fine once the parachutes reopen up. Hopefully. And they reopen back up, and the craft flips back around. And it lands back practically right back where it started, so always fun. And then we just recover the vessel, because it's literally still at the Kerbal Space Center. I'm fairly certain I should recover everything. So somehow I went from 2.2 signs to 5.2 signs, so I managed to get 5 extra signs. Right, from completing the job. 5 extra signs, 3 extra signs. And it's at the crawlway, so the salvaged vessel still retains 98% of its value. I'm guessing if I land directly on the launch pad, it retains full value, but don't hold me to that. Alright, and then we just look at everything. Because this isn't the first time Jebediah Kerman has just gone straight up and then back down, he gains no XP, so there's that. Alright, any other interesting jobs? Alright, so for this one I need to test the TS-18 stack separator splashdown at Kerbin. So unlike being landed where I'm on the ground, I actually have to be in the ocean. So I have to build a craft with this stack separator. I have to then launch the craft. I have to land it in the water, and then I have to test the stack separator. That's to be compared with this one, where I have to haul the TD-25 decoupler into an escape trajectory out of Kerbin. So rather than trying to get into orbit, I basically have to have a craft traveling so fast that it manages to escape the Kerbin gravity well, which isn't easy. If you think orbit's hard, trying to get something to leave the planet's even harder. I mean, it's not really, it just requires a large amount of fuel, and there's no way to get more fuel out there, short of mining for it, which isn't something I've ever actually gotten to in this game. So let's actually test this stack separator while being splashed down at Kerbin. So like I said, coupler, decoupler, stack separator. So the separator is in response to the Kerbal's not reading the coupler instructions properly, separates both ways. Okay. Is it the TS-18 stack separator. So it's this thing that I need. And it is rather large, surprisingly. Alright, so let's just get rid of this engine real quick. Need the fuel adapter. Just so that way things are flush. That's the T200 fuel tank. Just add 4 of these. Another one down here. And then we have the engine. And then once again, winglets. Right, and since I have to test the stack separator while splashed down at Kerbin, I'm going to need to swap out for staging purposes, going to need to get it so that way I can fire the parachutes before the stack separator. Because they have to be landed in the water in order to actually get it to count. Alright, since Jebediah took the last mission, our other pilot, Valentia Kerman, gets to run this one. So let's go launch this. Alright, SAS on, and full throttle, and fire engine. Alright, now as I said, we need to make it to the water, so just angle this slightly. Right. Alright, well, so this is the problem. It does not want to turn. There we are. Just turn SAS back on. The heat shield. I don't want to jettison the heat shield. Where is... Right, now we're heading downwards, so let's not increase thrust, let's cut it. This is a bad idea. Traveling too fast for the parachutes, and boom. Alright, we're at the vehicle assembly. Alright, so that didn't work. Because I had issues trying to control the vessel. Where is... Alright, I don't have any reactionary wheels, so... I have to remove the aerodynamic wings and go with these kinds of aerodynamic wings. I think the tail fins turn. Alright, let's try this one. And Valentia is still the pilot. Alright, SAS on, thrust to full, and fire. And back off thrust a little bit. And by a little bit, I mean about over a third. By the way, we're still traveling up, but the tail fins do help in steering the craft. A little bit more thrust. I'm just trying to arc it over the water. Crew port while flying over Kerbin's water. This perspective you can see underwater topography. And I keep this report, I get 3.5 extra signs. So let's actually keep this experiment and then shut it down because we're traveling rather fast. Alright, and then let's actually deploy the parachutes. Just so that way we don't increase speed fast enough so that way the parachutes no longer matter. And they open up, they swing the craft around, probably causing all manner of headaches for the pilot. I keep thinking that's relatively close, but I realize no, it's like about half a kilometer above the surface still. And now we are splashed down. Get the thingy, it says splash down, so we test it. We fire that off, and we're good. As the vessel falls apart, which is how it's supposed to work. Right, then we recover the vessel, and because the bottom is no longer attached to the top, it's no longer considered part of the vessel. I gained 10 extra science, well, 10 science. So I'm now at 10.7 science points. So yeah, I just gained basically the command pod, the heat shield, and the one fuel tank adapter that was connected to the command pod. Everything else, and again, Alina doesn't gain any experience, but everything else is still out there in forms of debris. So if I recover the vessel, let's splash down at Kerbin. Cover this part, I gain a little bit extra money. And this is the, well, that was the stack separator, and this is, well, everything else. So, that's now gone. We've recovered everything. Anything else that I want to do. Alright, and so in addition to the observational surveys and field testing various equipment in various points, I also have tourist flights. So I can basically get tourists, tourists show up and they want various things. So, for instance, Barakui and Dangrin have chartered a tour to see the sites right here in Kerbin, keep them alive, and show them a good time. So basically, each one wants to travel on a sub-orbital space flight. Sometimes they want orbit, sometimes they want something else. So for suborbit, I basically have to leave the atmosphere, which is something I can do. So we are going to take this contract, leave the facility, and then build something. And by something, I mean a spacecraft. And in fact, if I open up the saved spacecraft, I should have something I can use. Yeah, so I have this craft here. It's supposed to get the vessel, well, my people into orbit. It doesn't really, actually, I don't think I've actually tested this variant. But it has crew compartments enough to actually take the passengers. So, plop the tourists into crew cabin 1. And you know what, since I have the space, let's take Bill, the engineer, and Bob, the scientist, because other than the pilots, until I can get into orbit and do things in space, I don't really have a need for engineers and scientists. Oh, yeah, so, now, spare seats, might as well get them to do something. Alright, and let's go field test this. So, away we go. To the launch pad. Alright, SAS on. And I can also see all the various, well, people aboard the spaceship. Alright, thrust to full, even though the solid fuel rockets don't really have an issue with throttle. And then we away. So y'all's going to be a problem. I mean, Jebediah is working on it. That's why it's traveling largely straight up. But I should probably wait until the solid fuel rockets run out of gas before I start messing with, well, anything. And solid fuel rockets have run out of gas, so we jettison those and fire off the liquid fuel rockets. And try to straighten everything back out. Or not. Go to the map. Whoa. I haven't upgraded the tracking center, so I don't actually know how high that is. Although they are currently 20 to 23 meters and closer to their apex, so I'm assuming that's still in atmosphere. Wrong button. Alright, and those liquid fuel engines are now out, so we can jettison those. And fire off the other ones. Oops. There's a parachute. Stop. Alright, so I accidentally deployed the drogue chutes. That's going to be a problem. On the plus side, we left the atmosphere. I think we're heading east now. Just changing the orbital path. So, prograde is right there. That's the only name for these symbols that I remember. Prograde and retrograde. I know one's normal and anti-normal. I forget what the third one is. But basically, this is the direction of travel. So we are traveling in this direction, even though the front of the vessel is pointed this way. And this is our orbital path, so if it ever becomes a complete circle, it means we achieve orbit. Well, as long as the lower part of the circle is within the atmosphere, outside the atmosphere, I should say. Alright, so I don't think I'm actually going to be able to get into orbit. I mean, I don't want to get into orbit. I want a suborbital flight for the tourists. But given how much fuel I got left, I'm down to like a quarter tank of gas. And the fact that the arc is still this small. I mean, I say that it's encompassing almost half the planet. So, we're getting there. I mean, if I had more gas or wasn't traveling in the wrong direction initially, I probably could have, and I might actually still. And it is getting close. That is the horizon. That is the horizon right there. Right, so I don't actually want orbits. Let's actually cut the thrust. Find retrograde. Here's retrograde. Stop. I don't have any RCS thrusters, do I? No, I do not. And then burn the rest of the grass, trying to slow down. So now this arc should shrink. Alright, now I am completely out of gas, so let's actually try to flip over to prograde, because that's the direction of travel, and as we hit atmosphere, that's the direction that the ship is going to, well, hit the air in. And you want the heat shield air first, so since that's on the front of the vessel, very best we do it this way. Just increase the time warp slightly, just so that way we're not spending up to some odd hours just waiting for this thing to free fall back to the planet. Alright, now we're back in atmosphere, which is why the music stopped. Let's try to keep a pointed prograde. I mean, let's be honest, the atmosphere doesn't really become a problem until around like 40,000 kilometers, or not 40,000 kilometers, 40,000 meters, which, you know, it's now a problem because it's now fiery death. And I have the drogue chutes deployed by accident, so I'm surprised they haven't come out and ripped clean off the vessel yet. And things are starting to heat up. Quite a few things, actually. Yeah, this parachute's starting to overheat. Something exploded. Several things exploded. Try to keep it prograde so that with a heat shield is taking the brunt of the force. You know, it's kind of designed to take the heat. Then the drogue chutes auto-deploy because, again, accidentally fired the staging. Flipped everything around, but they managed to stay intact, which is, well, surprising, truth be told. I fully expected them to just rip clean off the vessel. So, I would say I have no idea what exploded, but it looks like it's two of the landing gears. So, if they land on the ground and I need the landing gear, it's going to be all lopsided. But it looks like they're flying over water right now, so moot point. But it is something I do need to worry about because, you know, things shouldn't explode upon re-entry. But now they're traveling at a comparatively safe speed, which means I can deploy the main chutes, which should slow the vessel down to from almost survivable to actually survivable. Just increase the time warp so that way, again, not spending an hour just watching this thing float down the last kilometer. have a splashdown, and the thing flops over. But the tourists are happy. They achieved their suborbital flight, and most of the vessel didn't explode, so that's always a good thing. Let's recover the vessel. But, you know, I almost made it into orbit, so kind of know what I need to do now. Like I said, if it didn't fly off into the wrong direction and I had enough gas, I probably could have actually managed to keep it, well, actually get it into orbit. I mean, the orbital path was actually hitting the horizon, but Bill and Bob now gain one more experience point because this is the first time they've actually done anything other than sit in the astronaut complex, waiting for something to do. So now they have purpose in their lives, and since I don't have access to reaction control thrusters right now, I don't think so anyway. Fairly certain that tab was completely empty. And yeah, it's flight control that I get that in, which is the only Tier 3 technology I don't have. So I need 45 more research points. Well, I need 45 research points to actually unlock it, and I have 10.7. So I need less than 35 science to actually get the ability to control things better. Wrong button. Also, let's spend 150,000 Kerbal dollars points currency to upgrade the tracking station. So it allows me to see patched cognates visible on the map, and maximum DNS power is 50G, whatever that is. But it's now upgraded. So it should allow me to track objects better and from farther away. And I think if I there's some untitled spacecraft debris still. What are you that broke? Oh, just a chunk of spacecraft from the other time. Alright, so mission control, available contracts to be managed, and it, okay, so flight planning, the thing that I actually wanted, is available once I upgrade the flight control facility, the mission control facility, but I need 200, no, flight planning is currently available. Right, so hopefully with the upgraded tracking station, I'll be able to actually see how high the arc is actually getting. And let's open this back up. So this almost worked. Almost worked quite a bit, quite easily. A lot. I wanted to say. Pop off these, put this here. Pop this one off, add in the tail fin. Right. It's gonna be one of these days. Put you there. Put you kind of off-centered. Got this one off. This one on. These off as well. I'm using tail fins as actual just wings. Alright, so hopefully that gets us better control while lower in the atmosphere, which is kind of what we needed. Because, you know, if we didn't flop around at the very beginning, we probably would have actually made it. So I think Jebediah took the last one, so let's have Valentia fly this one. And just for fun, let's pile in everybody else. So every astronaut we have, which means if this thing blows up and everybody dies, we're out of astronauts. For now. So let's just launch this and see what happens. And it's the middle of the night, because why not? Alright, SAS on. RCS on for whatever reason. Thrust to maximum, not that it matters right now, and away we go. Yeah, so Valentia's having a much easier time controlling the yaw than Jebediah did, because I swapped out the winglets for tail fins. So they're going more straight up than they did before, although pitch is throwing everything around. Solid fuel thrusters out of gas, so we jettison those. And turn on the main liquid fuel engines, and then we start trying to rotate the craft eastward, because that's the way the orbital path, I believe, is going to go. And we're having issues. Lots and lots of issues. So I think it wants to try to bend north, actually. So let's try not to overcompensate things. Can't I get the map? Alright, so Aposis, the highest the arc will actually travel right now is currently 40,000. So upgrading the tracking center basically shows us that. And the angle that we're traveling, it will get to above atmosphere, so let's actually cut the thrust. And since we're still in atmosphere and there's atmospheric drag, it is slowing down the vessel. And eventually, it'll get, well, it decreases the Aposis. Let's try to angle this a little bit more eastward. Then once we break atmosphere, I'll turn on the engines again and try to burn for as much arc as I can get, and we'll see if we can actually get into an orbital path. And we are now above the atmosphere, so let's fire off the thrusters. And that's it for the gas, so we jettison those. And turn on the other ones. All that goes away. Angle it a little bit more. Maybe not that much. And then we fire off the thrusters to try to gain as much speed as we can, because for orbital purposes, it's speed that is required for orbit. Like I said, you have to be traveling fast enough so that way as you fall down back to the planet falls away from you. And you don't get that traveling 700 meters a second. And we're actually past the Apophis now, so let's actually point slightly more upward. Just so that way we're trying to get away from surface. Yeah, we're heading back down. And now we're not. Though not as much. Now at the highest we can possibly go, the arc will take us. And since we're traveling straight up, well, that's as high as we're going to get. No, not so much. Let's angle it more this way. I don't remember what orbital velocity is for Kerbal. I want to say it's around 2 kilometers a second. Prograde rate's still above the horizon line, which means we are traveling upwards. And almost. Orbital line is almost touching, and we're almost out of gas. Alright, and now let's just kill thrust. Let's just kill thrust for a second, because now we have the Peripolis, which is the lowest of the orbital path. So it's now a circle, and we'll be traveling in a circle. But the Peripolis is within atmosphere. It's actually 13,875 meters. So I need the Peripolis, or the lowest part of the orbital arc, at above atmosphere in order for stable orbit, which it is not currently. In fact, I mean, it does kind of look like a hula hoop around the planet of Kerbin. But to increase the Peripolis, I need to be at Apophis, or at least the easiest way to do that. Anything that you do on the orbital path affects the opposite side of the orbit. So if I want the Peripolis up high enough, fast enough, I need to be at Apophis to do so, and vice versa. So if I want to just shrink the Apophis, I need to be at the Peripolis. Now, the only problem is I only have that much fuel left, and that's not enough to do anything and get back down. So what I'm going to do is warp to here, just simply because I don't feel like waiting 15 minutes. So now that we're at Apophis, or at least will be eventually, soon, here we are. That's the retrograde symbol. Oops. Stop. Come on. You know you want to. Just did an entire flip around. Come on. Alright, that's not the reaction control. That's kill throws. Alright, and if I max up thrust, you can see Peripolis jumps up relatively high. In fact, it's now above the atmosphere. So we are now technically in standard orbit, or at least full orbit. I mean, it's not anywhere close to being symmetrical or stable. I mean, we're traveling from 472,455 meters, I should say, to above the surface of Kerbin to 81,037, but it's above atmosphere, which means atmospheric drag will not slow us down, which means we have essentially, as far as I can tell, achieved orbit. Of course, now the only problem is getting back down with this little fuel. So if I point retrograde again, it should work easily because I'm this close to the Apophis still. But if I fire off what little gas I have left, it shrinks the other line, so now we should be getting back to Kerbin. Let's burn off all the gas we have. Alright. Alright, so we achieved standard orbit. Well, we achieved a successful orbit. Didn't get around to actually having them fly around the planet, which might be kind of nice, but for the purposes of this video, not really necessary. We just warp here, because I don't feel like waiting. How high is their height now? Still 300,000. Okay. If I go, say, here. They are now at 150,000 meters. And that's retrograde. And they are now traveling at over 2,000 meters a second, which is a bad sign because, well, bad things happen when you hit atmosphere at over 2 clicks a second. At least in my opinion. I mean, as long as the crew cabins survive, I don't really care what happens to the rest of the vessel. I'm out of gas, so the engines don't really matter anyway. And now we hit atmosphere again. Traveling at just over 2,300 meters a second. As I said, around 40,000 meters. That's when things get interesting. And because we're traveling so fast, things get interesting at 50,000 meters. Also, we're traveling above the ground, above the surface, so yeah, things are starting to overheat, including one parachute. Blew something up. A little bit more. Plus side, the parachutes haven't overheated yet. why I like having... This is why I figured out that having the heat shield in the very front is probably a good thing. And let me guess, I lost... Yeah, I lost 2 more landing gear. It's actually the same landing struts, too, both on this side. But we are now, less than 5 kilometers from the surface. And, well, I mean, the wings are still intact, so let's deploy the drogue chutes. Help slow the craft down. Hopefully. Maybe. And they open up, spin the craft around. But, they make it so it's almost survivable, even if it is spinning around and around. You'd think that the parachutes would get caught up amongst them. But let's deploy the regular parachutes. Hopefully this stabilizes everything. And it does not. At least not yet. And now that they're fully open, they do. And again, I'm surprised that with all that spinning, the parachutes didn't get tangled up amongst each other. But they didn't. I'm not quite certain if the game allows for that. But I won't complain because it turns an almost survivable but still fatal mission to a survivable one. And now we let them just travel the remaining half to 1/4 kilometer and then make a splashdown. Nice and safe. Hopefully. Things can still explode. And they make it down. And it flops over. But they're still alive. And end of day, that's what matters. Let's recover the vessel. Alright, recovery vessel returned from Kerbal orbit. So we gain 10 science just for doing that. All the various parts. And for the crew, everybody gains 1 or more experience point because they managed to get to orbit, which means they achieve 1 extra level. So they all advance to level 1, which means that they can do more things. With for the pilots, Jebediah and Valentia, they are able to have more piloting functions. I forget what the engineer and scientist get, but they can do more things. But we have now achieved orbit, which is a major step for the Kerbal Space Program. So now I have Explore Kerbal. I have no idea what this is. Right, so the CEO and chief bottle washer at the Kerbal World's First Record-Keeping Society stumbled on a problem. We have underestimated just how volatile solid rocket fuel really is, and now have found ourselves with a problem we can't solve on our own. But really, there's no sense in us still talking while there's science to be done. Shall we get to it? Our exploration for Kerbal is going according to plan. We must continue to unravel its mysteries. Prestige Trivial expires in 5 days. Test our rendezvous capabilities. Park 2 vessels next to each other around Kerbal. What could possibly go wrong? So I need to actually get 2 vessels right next to each other, which means I need to do an orbital, not insertion. I basically need to have 1 vessel in a stable orbit, and interception, that's what I wanted to say. Get an interception going so that way another vessel gets right next to it, which is something new that I'm surprised by. Usually it's get to orbit, and then it's get to the mun. So let's do this. And then there's also extra tourists who want suborbital flight, and another 6 that also want suborbital flight. So these should be relatively easy and comparatively lucrative jobs that we can complete. So I'll flag these. More observational surveys and more test various components at various points. So yeah, I can't even get to them. I can barely get to orbit. I can't really get to the mun. So now I have to take 8 tourists on a suborbital flight. I mean, I could do it all at once if I increase the size of this thing. It can hold 4 people plus the pilot. Well, I could do that. I do also need to work on the next major goal of getting two vessels to basically come into contact with each other. Rendezvous two vessels in orbit of Kerbal. Test our rendezvous capabilities. Park two vessels next to each other, each around Kerbal. What could possibly go wrong? Doesn't say how close they actually have to get, so I don't know if they actually have to be touching, they have to be docked, or they just have to be within visual contact with each other. But you know, that's what testing things out is for. And I mean, if you think getting into orbit's going to be a problem, getting into stable orbit, I should say, trying to get two vessels right next to each other is going to be a problem because interceptions take quite a bit of calculations, quite a bit of trial and error, quite a bit of luck, quite a bit of equipment, and quite a bit of fuel. None of which I actually have just yet, but at 36.7 points of science, I am getting close to getting enough for flight control, and then I can get, well, even more parts once I hit 90 science. I mean, there's a point at which it gets to the point where I can't get enough science to actually unlock new parts, which means I can't get any new things to gain more science to unlock new parts, and it just basically becomes a drag, so I stop. Haven't gotten to that point yet, so there's still more to do. However, all of that will have to be saved until next time, because I'm going to call it here. Everybody stay safe from the plague, and have a good day.